Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Timothy Rice had always believed in the sanctity of family. At 38, he was a man who'd built his life on principles that seemed increasingly rare in the modern world: loyalty, honor, and unwavering dedication to those he loved. His construction company, Rice and Associates, had grown from a two-man operation to employing over 60 people across the Pacific Northwest. Success hadn't changed him. He still drove the same Ford pickup he'd bought 8 years ago, still wore his wedding ring with pride, and still came home every evening to what he believed was the perfect family. The Rice household on Maple Street was the picture of suburban prosperity. Jessica Rice, his wife of 12 years, maintained their home with meticulous care. Their daughter, 8-year-old Emma, was the light of Timothy's world, a bright, spirited child with her mother's blonde hair and her father's stubborn determination. To anyone looking from the outside, they were living the American dream. But dreams, Timothy would soon learn, could shatter in an instant. It was a Tuesday evening in October when the first crack appeared in his carefully constructed world. Timothy had arrived home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Emma with tickets to the circus that weekend. As he approached the front door, he heard voices from the kitchen, Jessica's sharp tone cutting through the evening air like broken glass. "I swear to God, Emma, if you don't stop this behavior right now, I'll lock you in the refrigerator until you learn some respect." Timothy froze, his hand on the doorknob. Through the window, he could see his daughter's small frame trembling, tears streaming down her face. Jessica stood over her, hands on her hips, her face twisted with an anger Timothy had never seen before. "Please, Mommy, I'm sorry," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to spill the juice." "Sorry doesn't clean up messes, does it? Maybe some time in the cold and dark will teach you to be more careful." Timothy's blood ran cold. The refrigerator threat wasn't just cruel. It was dangerous, potentially deadly. He'd heard of cases where children had suffocated in refrigerators, even modern ones. The casual way Jessica delivered the threat, as if she'd said it before, made his stomach turn. He burst through the door, his construction-hardened frame filling the doorway. "What did you just say?" Jessica spun around, her face quickly rearranging into the sweet smile he'd fallen in love with years ago. "Timothy, you're home early. Emma just had a little accident with her juice, nothing I can't handle." "I heard what you said." His voice was deadly calm, a tone his employees recognized as the precursor to someone getting fired. "You threatened to lock our daughter in the refrigerator." "Oh, honey, you know how kids exaggerate. I was just trying to get her attention." Jessica moved toward him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm, but Timothy stepped back. "Emma, go to your room," he said, never taking his eyes off his wife. "Now." Their daughter scurried past him, shooting a fearful glance at her mother before disappearing up the stairs. Timothy waited until he heard her bedroom door close before speaking again. "That wasn't exaggeration, Jessica. I saw your face. I heard your voice. You meant every word." For a moment, the mask slipped completely. Jessica's eyes flashed with something cold and calculating. "She needs discipline, Timothy. You're always at work. You don't see how she behaves when you're not here. Sometimes children need to understand consequences." "Consequences? You threatened to lock an 8-year-old child in a refrigerator. That's not discipline. That's child abuse." Jessica laughed, a sound that sent chills down Timothy's spine. "You're being dramatic. I would never actually do it. It was just words." But Timothy knew better. He'd seen the look in her eyes, heard the conviction in her voice. This wasn't a moment of frustration. It was something deeper, something darker. As he looked at the woman he'd shared his life with for over a decade, he realized he might not know her at all. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. Timothy helped Emma with her homework, read her a bedtime story, and tucked her in with extra care. When she asked if Mommy was mad at her, he assured her that none of this was her fault. But inside, his mind was racing. How long had Jessica been threatening their daughter? What else had happened when he wasn't home? And most importantly, what kind of woman had he married? As he lay in bed that night, Jessica sleeping peacefully beside him, Timothy stared at the ceiling and made a decision. He needed to know the truth about his wife, and he needed to protect his daughter, whatever it took. Chapter 2. Unraveling Threads. The following morning, Timothy called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. After Jessica left for her job at the local real estate office and Emma was safely at school, he began his investigation. He told himself he was being paranoid, that there had to be a reasonable explanation for what he'd witnessed. He started in Jessica's home office, a small room she'd claimed as her own for work-related activities. Timothy had always respected her privacy, never questioning the locked desk drawers or the password-protected laptop. Now, those boundaries seemed less like respect and more like willful blindness. The desk drawers were locked, but Timothy's construction background had taught him a thing or two about getting past simple barriers. Inside the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of real estate flyers, he found a folder that made his blood freeze. The folder contained printed emails, dozens of them, dating back nearly 2 years. The sender was Chad Lester, a name Timothy recognized as one of Jessica's newer clients. But these weren't business communications. They were intimate, explicit, and undeniably romantic. Can't wait to hold you again, my beautiful Jess. Thursday afternoons at the Riverside Hotel have become the highlight of my week. Your husband has no idea what he's losing. When we're finally together for good, I'll treat you like the queen you deserve to be. Emma's getting more difficult about our arrangement. Maybe it's time to be firmer with her. Children need to learn their place. That last email, dated just 2 weeks ago, hit Timothy like a physical blow. Emma's behavior issues weren't behavioral problems. They were a child's natural resistance to her mother's betrayal and the presence of a stranger in their lives. Timothy photographed every email with his phone, his hands steady despite the rage building inside him. 12 years of marriage, and Jessica had been systematically destroying their family for nearly 2 of them. The woman who'd threatened their daughter, who'd shared their bed while planning a future with another man, was a stranger wearing his wife's face. But the emails were just the beginning. Hidden behind a false back in the drawer, Timothy found financial documents that painted an even more disturbing picture. Jessica had been slowly draining their joint savings account, moving money to a separate account he'd never known existed. Nearly $40,000, money he'd earned through sweat and sacrifice, had been transferred over the past 18 months. The pattern was clear. Jessica and Chad weren't just having an affair. They were planning to leave together, and they intended to take Timothy's money and his daughter with them. His phone rang, startling him from his discoveries. The caller ID showed his father's number. Dad, Timothy, son, we need to talk. Jessica called us this morning, very upset about last night. Timothy's jaw tightened. What did she tell you? She said you accused her of threatening Emma, that you've been acting suspicious and paranoid lately. She's worried about you, son. We all are. Dad, what exactly did she say happened? Franklin Powers, Timothy's father, sighed heavily. She said Emma spilled something, and when Jessica tried to discipline her, you flew into a rage. She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown from work stress. And you believe her? Timothy, we've known Jessica for 12 years. She's a wonderful mother and wife. This doesn't sound like her at all. Timothy felt something snap inside him. She threatened to lock Emma in the refrigerator, Dad. I heard her with my own ears. Now, son, you know children exaggerate, and sometimes when we're stressed. I'm not stressed, and I'm not making this up. Timothy's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. Your granddaughter was threatened with being locked in a refrigerator, and you're taking the word of the person who made the threat? Your mother and I think Jessica's right. Emma needs more discipline, and maybe you're too soft on her. Jessica was probably just trying to get through to her. The words hit Timothy like a sledgehammer. His own parents, the people who'd raised him to protect the innocent and stand up for what was right, were taking the side of a woman who'd threatened their granddaughter's safety. I can't believe what I'm hearing, Timothy said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Timothy, we think you should apologize to Jessica and maybe consider some counseling. For the family's sake. Timothy hung up without another word. As he stood in his wife's office, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal, he realized the depth of the conspiracy against him. Jessica hadn't just been cheating, she'd been systematically turning his own family against him, positioning herself as the victim of his supposed instability. But Timothy Rice wasn't the type of man to be outmaneuvered by lies and manipulation. He'd built his business by being smarter, more determined, and more ruthless than his competitors. Now, he'd apply those same skills to protecting his daughter and destroying everyone who'd betrayed them. The game was on, and Jessica had no idea who she was really playing against. Chapter 3. the architect of ruin. Timothy spent the rest of the day planning with the same methodical precision he used to design construction projects. But instead of blueprints for buildings, he was architecting the systematic destruction of everyone who'd betrayed him and Emma. First, he needed more information about Chad Lester. A few quick internet searches revealed that Chad was a divorced father of two, a former college football player who now worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative. His divorce had been finalized just 6 months ago, which explained the timing of his intensified relationship with Jessica. But Timothy needed more than surface information. He called Mitchell Root, a private investigator who'd helped him with background checks on potential employees. Mitchell was expensive, discreet, and had no moral qualms about bending rules when the price was right. Timothy Rice, Mitchell answered on the first ring. Haven't heard from you in a while. What kind of problem are we solving today? The kind that requires absolute discretion and complete thoroughness, Timothy replied. I need everything you can find on a man named Chad Lester and his relationship with my wife. There was a pause. That kind of problem. Understood. How deep do you want me to dig? To the center of the earth, if necessary. Financial records, communication patterns, travel history, personal relationships. I want to know everything about this man and how he's been destroying my family. Consider it done. This is going to cost. Money is no object. How quickly can you work? Give me 48 hours for a preliminary report. A week for the complete picture. Timothy arranged to meet Mitchell that evening to provide Jessica's information and Chad's contact details. The investigator would handle the technical surveillance, while Timothy focused on the more personal aspects of his plan. Next, he called his lawyer, Stephen Riggs, a man who'd handled the legal aspects of Timothy's business expansion and had a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthlessly efficient. Stephen, I need to see you today. It's urgent. What's the nature of the emergency? Divorce, custody, asset protection, and possibly criminal charges. Stephen's tone shifted immediately. Come to my office in 2 hours. Bring everything you have. As Timothy gathered the evidence he'd discovered, his phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Having dinner with clients tonight. We'll be late. Kiss Emma for me. Timothy almost laughed at the transparent lie. According to the emails, Thursday evenings were when Jessica and Chad met at the Riverside Hotel. She was so confident in her deception that she wasn't even trying to create believable cover stories anymore. But this gave Timothy an opportunity. He called his next-door neighbor, Maribel Banks, an elderly woman who'd always been fond of Emma. Mrs. Banks, I have an unusual favor to ask. Could you watch Emma for a few hours tonight? I have some business to attend to, and Jessica is working late. Of course, dear. Emma's always welcome here. Is everything all right? Everything will be fine, Timothy assured her. Soon. That evening, after dropping Emma at Mrs. Banks' house, Timothy drove to the Riverside Hotel. He'd already confirmed Chad's car was in the parking lot, a flashy red BMW that screamed insecurity and overcompensation. Timothy parked across the street and called Mitchell. I need you to accelerate the timeline, Timothy said, watching the hotel entrance. They're together right now, and I want audio surveillance of their conversation. That's going to require some creative interpretation of privacy laws, Mitchell warned. I told you money was no object. How creative can you get? Give me an hour. Timothy waited in his truck, his mind calculating the next phases of his plan. Jessica and Chad thought they were playing a simple game of adultery and financial manipulation. They had no idea they were about to become pieces in a much larger, more complex strategy. His phone rang. It was his mother, Wilma Powers. Timothy, your father told me about your conversation today. I think you owe Jessica an apology. Mom, let me ask you something. If you saw someone threatening to lock Emma in a refrigerator, what would you do? Oh, honey, you know Jessica would never actually hurt Emma. She was probably just trying to get through to her. Children today are so spoiled. Timothy felt the last vestiges of respect for his parents crumble. So you think it's acceptable to threaten an 8-year-old with being locked in a refrigerator? I think you're overreacting, and I think Jessica deserves an apology. Your father and I raised you better than this. You're right, Timothy said, his voice deadly calm. You did raise me better than this. You taught me to protect the innocent and punish those who hurt them. You taught me that family loyalty goes both ways. And you taught me that sometimes the people closest to you can be the ones who betray you the most. Timothy, what are you? He hung up and turned off his phone. He was done with explanations. done with trying to make people see reason. From now on, he would let his actions speak for themselves. Mitchell called back within the hour. I've got ears in their room. You're not going to like what you hear, but you need to know. Timothy listened to the audio feed through his earpiece, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Jessica and Chad weren't just planning to leave together. They were discussing how to frame Timothy as an unfit father. He's getting suspicious. Jessica's voice came through clearly. Last night, he completely lost it over nothing. I think we need to move faster. What do you want to do about Emma? Chad asked. We stick to the plan. Document everything that makes him look unstable. I've already called his parents and planted seeds about his mental state. By the time we're ready to leave, I'll have enough evidence to ensure I get full custody. And the money? Almost finished transferring it. He'll never see a penny of what he thinks he earned. Timothy had heard enough. As he sat in his truck, listening to his wife plan his destruction with her lover, something fundamental shifted inside him. The man who'd tried to solve this with reason, who'd hoped for explanations and apologies, died that night in the Riverside Hotel parking lot. What emerged was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Jessica and Chad wanted to play games with his life, his money, and his daughter's future. Fine. But they were about to learn that Timothy Rice didn't just play games, he won them. And when he won, his enemies didn't just lose. They were utterly, completely, and irrevocably destroyed. The real game was about to begin. Chapter 4. Gathering the Arsenal. The next morning, Timothy moved through his house like a predator stalking prey. Jessica had returned home late, spinning another elaborate lie about client dinners and contract negotiations. She'd kissed him good morning with the same lips that had been whispering plans for his destruction just hours earlier. The performance was flawless. If Timothy hadn't known the truth, he might have believed her completely. But Timothy was no longer the trusting husband Jessica thought she was manipulating. As she left for work, he was already implementing the next phase of his plan. His first stop was Stephen Riggs' law office. The attorney had reviewed Timothy's evidence overnight and had prepared a strategy that was both legally sound and devastatingly effective. The emails alone give us grounds for adultery-based divorce, Stephen explained, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. The financial transfers constitute theft, and the threats against Emma could support criminal charges of child endangerment. That's not enough, Timothy said flatly. I want them destroyed, not just defeated. Stephen raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you proposing? I want Chad Lester's life ruined. His career, his reputation, his relationships, everything. And I want Jessica to lose more than just our marriage. I want her to understand that betraying me and threatening my daughter comes with consequences she never imagined. Timothy, I understand you're angry, but we need to stay within legal boundaries. Then find me boundaries that give me room to work, Timothy interrupted. You're the most expensive lawyer in the state for a reason, Stephen. Earn your fee. Stephen was quiet for a long moment, then smiled, a cold expression that reminded Timothy why this man had never lost a case. There are ways to apply pressure that don't involve illegal activity, but they require patience and precision. Tell me. Chad works for Meridian Pharmaceuticals. His territory includes several of your construction clients, hospitals, medical facilities. If those clients were to express concerns about his professionalism or reliability, they'd investigate him, Timothy finished. An investigation would lead to discovery. Exactly. Meanwhile, Jessica's real estate license requires clean financial records and moral character. If the state licensing board were to receive anonymous tips about her financial irregularities and personal conduct, Timothy was beginning to see the elegant brutality of Stephen's approach. How long would all this take? If done correctly? 3 to 6 months for complete demolition of their professional lives. But Timothy, once we start this, there's no going back. Are you sure this is what you want? Timothy thought of Emma's terrified face, of his parents' betrayal, of Jessica's casual cruelty. Start the process. Next, Timothy met with Mitchell Root at a small diner outside town. The private investigator had been busy, and his findings painted an even more disturbing picture of Chad Lester. Your boy Chad has a pattern, Mitchell explained, sliding a thick folder across the table. This isn't his first affair with a married woman. In the past 5 years, I've documented relationships with at least 3 other married clients. His ex-wife cited his infidelity as grounds for divorce, but but she never pressed charges for some of the financial manipulations I uncovered. What kind of manipulations? He convinced two of his previous conquests to invest in fictional business opportunities. Took them for nearly $80,000 combined. They were too embarrassed to prosecute. Classic con man strategy. Timothy felt a savage satisfaction. Chad wasn't just an adulterer. He was a predator who specifically targeted married women for financial exploitation. What about his current situation? He's living beyond his means, probably counting on Jessica's money to keep him afloat. His pharmaceutical sales numbers have been declining, and there are rumors that his territory might be downsized. He's desperate, which makes him dangerous but also predictable. And Jessica? Clean professionally, but I found something interesting in her personal history. Mitchell pulled out another set of documents. Her first serious relationship, before she met you, ended when her boyfriend accused her of emotional manipulation and financial theft. No charges filed, but the pattern's there. Timothy stared at the documents, realizing he'd married a woman whose entire relationship history was built on deception and manipulation. How did I miss all this? She's good at what she does, Mitchell said simply. But now that you know what to look for, we can use her patterns against her. That afternoon, Timothy returned home to find a surprise waiting for him. His parents' car was in the driveway, and through the window, he could see Franklin and Wilma Powers sitting in his living room with Jessica and Emma. Timothy's jaw tightened as he entered the house. Emma ran to him, wrapping her small arms around his waist, but he could see the tension in her face. Something had happened. Timothy, his mother said, standing as he entered. We need to have a family discussion. About what? Timothy asked, though he suspected he already knew. About your behavior toward Jessica, his father replied. She's told us about your accusations, your suspicious activities. Son, we're worried about you. Timothy looked at his wife, who was sitting primly on the couch, her face arranged in an expression of concerned innocence. The performance was masterful. If he didn't know better, he might have believed she was genuinely worried about his mental state. What exactly has Jessica told you? Timothy asked. That you've been paranoid, accusatory, Wilma replied. That you've been going through her personal things, making wild claims about her work relationships. Timothy, this isn't like you. And what about Emma? Timothy asked, pulling his daughter closer. Has anyone asked her about what happened the other night? His parents exchanged glances with Jessica. Children sometimes misunderstand adult conversations, Franklin said. Jessica explained that she was just trying to teach Emma about consequences. Timothy felt Emma's grip tighten around his waist. His 8-year-old daughter was terrified, and the adults who should have been protecting her were instead protecting the person who'd threatened her. Emma, Timothy said gently, kneeling to her level. Can you tell Grandpa and Grandma what Mommy said about the refrigerator? Timothy, don't put her in the middle of this, Jessica said sharply. But Emma was already speaking, her voice small but clear. Mommy said she would lock me in the refrigerator if I didn't stop being bad. She said the cold and dark would teach me to behave. The room fell silent. Timothy watched his parents' faces, waiting for them to finally understand the gravity of what had happened. But instead of concern for Emma, he saw doubt. Doubt about her story, doubt about her interpretation of events. Sweetheart, Wilma said, her voice patronizing. Sometimes when grown-ups are upset, they say things they don't mean. I'm sure Mommy was just trying to help you understand. She meant it. Emma interrupted, her voice stronger now. She had the angry face, and she opened the refrigerator door and pointed inside. Timothy felt something break inside his chest. His own parents were gaslighting his daughter, minimizing her trauma to protect Jessica's image. The betrayal was complete. I think it's time for everyone to leave, Timothy said, standing. Son, we're trying to help, Franklin began. Get out. Timothy's voice was deadly quiet. All of you. Now. Timothy, you can't throw your parents out of your house, Jessica protested. Watch me. Timothy moved toward the door, opening it wide. Mom, Dad, you've made your choice. You've chosen to protect the person who threatened your granddaughter over the granddaughter herself. I won't forget that. His parents left reluctantly, casting worried glances at Jessica as if she were the victim in the situation. After they were gone, Jessica turned to Timothy with a satisfied smile. You just alienated your own parents, she said. Who's going to believe your stories now? Timothy smiled back, and Jessica's expression faltered slightly. There was something in his eyes she'd never seen before, something cold and calculating that made her step backward. "You're right, Jessica. No one's going to believe my stories. But that's okay, because I'm done telling stories. From now on, I'm going to let the facts speak for themselves." As Timothy tucked Emma into bed that night, she whispered, "Daddy, are you going to protect me from Mommy?" "Always, sweetheart," Timothy promised. "No matter what it takes." And looking into his daughter's trusting eyes, Timothy made a final commitment to his plan. Jessica had turned his parents against him, but she'd also shown him exactly who she really was. Now it was time to show her, and everyone else, who Timothy Rice really was when someone threatened his child. The arsenal was gathered. The strategy was set. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. 2 weeks into Timothy's campaign, the first cracks began to show in his enemy's armor. Jessica and Chad had no idea they were walking into carefully laid traps, their every move being documented and their weaknesses systematically exploited. Timothy's construction business had given him connections throughout the medical and pharmaceutical industry, connections he was now using with surgical precision. Dr. Harriet Solomon, chief administrator at Riverside General Hospital, had been one of Timothy's first major clients when he'd built the hospital's new wing 3 years earlier. She trusted his judgment implicitly. "I hate to bring this to your attention, Dr. Solomon," Timothy said during their carefully orchestrated meeting, "but I've received some concerning reports about one of the pharmaceutical representatives who services your facility." "What kind of concerns?" Dr. Solomon asked, leaning forward with interest. "Inappropriate conduct with staff members, potential conflicts of interest, possible violations of professional ethics codes." Timothy slid a folder across her desk. "I thought you should be aware before it becomes a larger problem." The folder contained carefully edited excerpts from Chad's emails to Jessica, just enough to show his unprofessional behavior without revealing Timothy's source. Dr. Solomon's expression grew increasingly grave as she read. "This is very serious, Timothy. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. We'll be conducting a full investigation of Mr. Lester's conduct." "I thought you should know," Timothy replied. "Your patients deserve better than this." By the end of the week, Chad had received formal complaints from 3 major medical facilities in his territory. His supervisor at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, Gregory Hart, called him into the office for what Chad assumed would be a routine performance review. Instead, he found himself facing questions about his professional conduct and relationship boundaries. Meanwhile, Jessica was facing her own professional crisis. Anonymous tips to the state real estate licensing board had triggered an investigation into her financial practices. The board was particularly interested in the large cash deposits she'd been making to her private account, deposits that didn't correspond to any documented real estate transactions. Timothy watched his wife's growing stress with satisfaction. Jessica tried to hide her anxiety, but he could see it in the way she checked her phone constantly, in the dark circles under her eyes, in the sharpness of her voice when she spoke to Emma. "Having problems at work?" Timothy asked one evening as Jessica stared at her laptop with barely concealed panic. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied, but her fingers were shaking as she typed. "Maybe I can help. I know people in the real estate industry." Jessica looked up sharply, suspicion flashing in her eyes. "Since when do you know real estate people?" "I've been networking more lately," Timothy said casually. "You never know when business connections might come in handy." The paranoia was setting in, just as Timothy had planned. Jessica was starting to wonder if her professional problems were coincidental or if someone was working against her. But she couldn't possibly suspect Timothy. He was just the oblivious husband she'd been manipulating for months. At the same time, Timothy was implementing the more personal aspects of his revenge. Using information from Mitchell's investigation, he'd contacted Chad's ex-wife, Darla Hernandez, and learned about Chad's pattern of financial manipulation during their marriage. "He convinced me to take out a second mortgage on our house," Darla explained during their coffee meeting. "Said it was for a business investment that would make us rich. Instead, he used the money to impress other women. I lost the house in the divorce." "Would you be willing to testify about his conduct if it became necessary?" Timothy asked. "Are you kidding? I'd testify for free if it meant stopping him from doing to someone else what he did to me." Timothy now had a documented pattern of Chad's fraudulent behavior, witness testimony, and evidence of ongoing financial crimes. But he wasn't ready to play those cards yet. First, He wanted to see how far Chad and Jessica would go when they felt the pressure mounting. The answer came sooner than expected. On a Friday evening, Timothy returned home to find Emma crying in her room. When he asked what was wrong, his daughter's explanation sent cold fury racing through his veins. "Mommy brought her friend Chad to pick me up from school today," Emma sobbed. "He said I had to call him Uncle Chad now, and that soon we were all going to live together in a new house. When I said I didn't wanna, Mommy got really angry." Timothy's hands clenched into fists. Jessica had introduced Chad to Emma without his knowledge or consent, and they were already manipulating his daughter into accepting their planned new arrangement. "What else did they say, sweetheart? Chad said if I was good and didn't tell you about him, he'd buy me a pony. But if I told you, then something bad might happen to you." Timothy felt his vision turn red. They weren't just stealing his money and planning to take his daughter. They were threatening Emma's emotional well-being and using her love for him as a weapon. That night, after Emma was asleep, Timothy confronted Jessica in their bedroom. "Interesting school pickup today," he said casually. Jessica's face went pale, then quickly rearranged itself into innocent confusion. "What do you mean?" "Emma mentioned meeting a new friend of yours. Chad, was it?" "Oh, that." Jessica laughed nervously. "He's just a client. I ran into him near the school, and he offered to help when my car wouldn't start. And he suggested Emma call him Uncle Chad because children need to be polite to adults. Timothy, you're reading too much into innocent conversation." Timothy stepped closer to his wife, and she unconsciously backed toward the wall. "Jessica, let me be very clear about something. If you ever introduce Emma to Chad again without my explicit permission, if you ever let him speak to my daughter about our family situation, if you ever use her as a pawn in whatever game you're playing, the consequences will be more severe than you can imagine." "You're scaring me, Timothy. This paranoid behavior isn't healthy." "Good," Timothy replied. "You should be scared, because you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone threatens my daughter." As Jessica stared at him with growing alarm, Timothy realized she was finally beginning to understand that she might have underestimated her opponent. But it was too late for wisdom. The trap had already closed around her and Chad. They just didn't know it yet. The next phase of Timothy's plan would ensure that they learned the true cost of betraying him and threatening Emma. And by the time they understood what was happening, escape would be impossible. Chapter 6. The Tightening Noose. The walls were closing in on Jessica and Chad faster than they could comprehend. Their professional lives were crumbling, their personal stress was mounting, and they were starting to make desperate mistakes. Exactly what Timothy had been counting on. Chad's situation at Meridian Pharmaceuticals had deteriorated beyond repair. After the hospital complaints, his supervisor Gregory Hart had launched a full investigation into Chad's client relationships. What they found was a pattern of boundary violations, inappropriate personal relationships, and potential conflicts of interest that violated multiple company policies. "I don't understand what's happening," Chad complained to Jessica during one of their increasingly frantic phone calls that Timothy was monitoring through Mitchell's surveillance equipment. 3 clients filed complaints in the same week. "That can't be a coincidence." "Maybe it's Timothy," Jessica replied, her voice tight with anxiety. "He's been acting strange lately, asking questions about my work contacts. How could he know about us? We've been careful." "I don't know, but something's wrong. The real estate board is investigating my finances. My broker is asking questions about my transaction records. It's like someone's systematically attacking my career." Timothy listened to their growing panic with cold satisfaction. They were right to be paranoid. He was systematically destroying their professional lives. But they still had no idea about the larger trap he was setting. The beauty of Timothy's strategy was its multi-layered nature. While Jessica and Chad struggled with their professional crises, he was quietly building legal cases against both of them. Stephen Riggs had been busy filing motions and preparing documentation that would ensure Timothy maintained custody of Emma while pursuing criminal charges against Jessica for the refrigerator threat. "The child endangerment case is stronger than I initially thought," Stephen reported during their weekly meeting. Emma's statement was recorded by a court-approved child psychologist, and her testimony is compelling. Combined with the documented emotional manipulation and the financial theft, Jessica is looking at potential criminal charges and definite loss of custody rights. What about Chad? His pattern of financial fraud gives us multiple avenues for prosecution. His ex-wife's testimony, combined with the evidence from his current scheme with Jessica, should be enough to file charges for theft by deception and conspiracy to commit fraud. Timothy nodded, but his expression remained grim. Legal consequences aren't enough, Stephen. I want them to understand that betraying my family comes with personal costs beyond what any court can impose. What are you planning, Timothy? I'm planning to give them exactly what they've been working toward, just not the way they expected. The next escalation came when Jessica made a critical error in judgment. Desperate to salvage her real estate career and convinced that Timothy was somehow behind her problems, she decided to force a confrontation. Timothy came home from work to find Jessica waiting in the living room with Emma beside her. His daughter's face was tear-streaked and frightened, and Jessica's expression was a mixture of desperation and determination. "We need to talk," Jessica announced. "Emma, tell your father what we discussed." Emma looked between her parents with obvious distress. "Mommy says if you don't stop being mean to her friends at work, she's going to take me to live with Grandma and Grandpa." Timothy's blood pressure spiked, but his voice remained calm. "Is that what Mommy said? She said you've been telling lies about her to important people, and that if you don't stop, we can't live here anymore." Timothy knelt down to Emma's level, his heart breaking at the fear in his daughter's eyes. "Sweetheart, go to your room and start your homework. Mommy and I need to have a grown-up conversation." After Emma left, Timothy stood and faced his wife. "Using our daughter to deliver threats, Jessica? That's a new low even for you. I know you're behind the investigation at work," Jessica hissed. "I know you're trying to destroy my career. But if you think you can intimidate me, you're wrong." "Am I intimidating you?" Timothy asked, genuinely curious. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one making threats about taking my daughter away from her home." "Our daughter, Timothy. And yes, if you don't stop this campaign against me, I will take her somewhere safe." Timothy smiled, and Jessica took an unconscious step backward. "Safe? You want to talk about safety? Let's discuss the safety of threatening to lock an 8-year-old child in a refrigerator. Let's talk about the safety of introducing her to your lover without her father's knowledge. Let's talk about the safety of stealing money from her college fund to finance your affair." Jessica's face went white. "How do you? I don't know what you're talking about." The Riverside Hotel, Thursday evenings, room 237. Chad Lester, pharmaceutical sales, divorced father of 2. $40,000 transferred from our joint account to your private account over the past 18 months. Should I continue? Jessica's composure cracked completely. "You've been spying on me. I've been protecting my daughter and my assets from a woman who threatened to lock a child in a refrigerator and a man who makes a living manipulating married women." "You can't prove anything," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Timothy pulled out his phone and played the audio recording from the Riverside Hotel. Jessica's own voice filled the room, discussing plans to frame Timothy as mentally unstable and take Emma away from him. "You recorded us?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "I documented your conspiracy to commit fraud, parental alienation, and child endangerment. The question now is what you're going to do with this information." Jessica stared at him with growing horror as she realized the scope of what he'd uncovered. "What do you want?" "I want you to pack your things and leave this house tonight. I want you to break off all contact with Chad Lester. And I want you to sign custody papers giving me full legal and physical custody of Emma. And if I don't," Timothy's smile turned predatory, "then tomorrow morning, the police will receive copies of all my evidence. The state licensing board will get detailed documentation of your financial irregularities, and Emma will hear the recorded conversations where you and Chad discussed manipulating her emotions and using her as a weapon against me." Jessica's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch. "You can't do this to me." "I can and I will. You had choices, Jessica. You could have been honest about your problems with our marriage. You could have asked for a divorce instead of cheating and stealing. Most importantly, you could have never threatened our daughter's safety. But you made different choices, and now you get to live with the consequences." As Timothy watched his wife realize that her carefully planned deception had been turned against her, he felt no sympathy. Jessica had gambled with Emma's emotional well-being, stolen money meant for their daughter's future, and threatened the safety of an innocent child. She'd chosen her lover over her family, and she'd enlisted Timothy's own parents in her campaign of manipulation. Now she would learn that Timothy Rice was not a man who forgave betrayal. He was a man who destroyed it completely, methodically, and without mercy. The game was almost over. Jessica just didn't know it yet. Chapter 7. The Perfect Storm. Jessica's departure from the house that night was swift and devastating. Timothy had given her 2 hours to pack essentials and leave, and she'd used every minute trying to negotiate, threaten, and manipulate her way out of the corner he'd trapped her in. But Timothy was unmoved by her tears, unmoved by her promises to change, and completely immune to her attempts to make him feel guilty for destroying their marriage. "You destroyed our marriage the moment you threatened Emma," Timothy told her as she loaded her suitcase into her car. "Everything that's happened since then has just been consequences." "The custody papers," Jessica said desperately. "I won't sign them. You can't make me give up my daughter." "Emma was never your daughter to give up," Timothy replied coldly. "She was your victim, and victims deserve protection from their abusers." Jessica drove away with tears streaming down her face, but Timothy felt no sympathy. She'd made her choices, and now she would live with them. But her departure was only the beginning of the final phase of his plan. The next morning brought a cascade of carefully orchestrated disasters for both Jessica and Chad. Timothy had spent weeks setting up dominoes, and now he was pushing them over in rapid succession. Chad arrived at Meridian Pharmaceuticals to find security guards waiting at his desk. Gregory Hart emerged from the elevator with a grim expression and a folder of termination documents. "Chad, we need to discuss some serious irregularities in your client relationships and financial reporting." The folder contained evidence of Chad's pattern of inappropriate relationships with married clients, his declining sales performance, and, most damaging, documentation of his scheme to manipulate Jessica into stealing money from her husband. Timothy had made sure Meridian's executives understood that Chad's behavior could expose the company to significant legal liability. "I don't understand," Chad stammered as Hart outlined the charges against him. "These are all lies, fabrications." "Are they?" Hart asked, producing transcripts of Chad's recorded conversations with Jessica. "Because we have audio evidence of you discussing plans to defraud Mr. Rice and manipulate his wife into committing theft." Chad's face went ashen as he realized the scope of the evidence against him. "How did you get these recordings?" "That's not your concern anymore, Chad. Your concern is that we're terminating your employment immediately, and we'll be cooperating fully with law enforcement in their investigation of your activities." While Chad was being escorted from his office, Jessica was facing her own reckoning at the real estate board's emergency hearing. The board had received extensive documentation of her financial irregularities, including bank records showing unexplained cash deposits and transfers that violated state regulations for real estate transactions. "Ms. Rice," the board chairman said sternly, "these financial irregularities suggest a pattern of behavior that calls into question your fitness to hold a real estate license." Jessica tried to explain that the money came from family accounts, that she had every right to access funds from her joint account with Timothy. But the board was more interested in the fact that she'd failed to properly document these transactions and had used her real estate business as a cover for moving money she'd stolen from her husband. Furthermore, the chairman continued, "We've received information about personal conduct that reflects poorly on the integrity of licensed real estate professionals in this state." By noon, both Chad and Jessica had lost their professional licenses and their sources of income. But Timothy wasn't finished with them yet. The afternoon brought visits from Detective Seth Hayes of the local police department. Detective Hayes had received extensive documentation about the conspiracy between Chad and Jessica, including evidence of their plans to defraud Timothy and their pattern of emotional manipulation of Emma. "Mr. Lester," Detective Hayes said as Chad answered his door, "I need to discuss some allegations that have been brought to our attention regarding theft, conspiracy, and possible child endangerment." Chad's world continued to collapse as he realized that his problems weren't limited to losing his job. The detective outlined potential criminal charges including theft by deception, conspiracy to commit fraud, and contributing to the endangerment of a minor. "I want a lawyer," Chad said, his voice shaking. "That's your right," Detective Hayes replied. "But Mr. Lester, you should know that we have extensive evidence of your activities, including recorded conversations and financial documentation. Your cooperation could influence how the prosecutor handles your case." Jessica received a similar visit an hour later. Detective Hayes was thorough and professional as he outlined the charges she was facing, including theft, conspiracy, and child endangerment related to her threat to lock Emma in the refrigerator. The child endangerment charge alone carries serious penalties, Detective Hayes explained. When combined with the theft and conspiracy charges, you're looking at potential jail time and definite loss of custody rights. This is all Timothy's doing, Jessica protested. He's trying to frame me because he's angry about the divorce. Ma'am, we have audio recordings of you and Mr. Lester planning these activities. We have bank records showing the theft. And we have your daughter's testimony about the refrigerator threat, corroborated by a court-appointed child psychologist. This isn't about a divorce dispute. This is about documented criminal activity. As the legal walls closed in around Jessica and Chad, Timothy was implementing the final personal elements of his revenge. He'd arranged for Chad's ex-wife, Darla, to meet with Detective Hayes and provide testimony about Chad's previous patterns of financial manipulation. He'd also ensured that Jessica's parents, who lived in another state, received detailed information about their daughter's activities. The phone call from Jessica's mother was everything Timothy had hoped for. "Timothy, we just received some very disturbing information about Jessica," Mrs. Dixon said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Is it true that she threatened to lock Emma in a refrigerator? Is it true that she's been stealing money and having an affair?" "I'm afraid it is, Mrs. Dixon. I have documented evidence of all of it." "Oh my God. We had no idea. We thought you two were happy." "So did I," Timothy replied. "But Jessica made choices that put Emma in danger, and I couldn't allow that to continue." "Of course not. Timothy, we want you to know that we support you completely. If you need anything, character witnesses, help with Emma, anything, you just call us." The irony wasn't lost on Timothy that Jessica's own parents were now offering to testify against her, while his parents had sided with the woman who'd threatened their granddaughter. Family loyalty, he'd learned, wasn't always about blood relations. But the most satisfying element of Timothy's revenge was still to come. He'd saved the best for last, a revelation that would destroy not just Chad and Jessica's future plans, but their ability to trust anyone ever again. That evening, as Chad sat in his empty apartment and Jessica stayed in a cheap motel, both of them received identical packages. Inside each package was a detailed dossier showing how thoroughly Timothy had orchestrated their downfall. The dossiers contained copies of all the evidence Timothy had gathered, transcripts of their recorded conversations, photographs of them together at the hotel, and, most devastating, a timeline showing how every coincidental problem they'd faced had been carefully planned and executed by Timothy over the course of months. But the final page of each dossier contained the most crushing revelation of all, a letter explaining that their relationship itself had been manipulated by Timothy from the beginning. "Chad, Jessica, by now you understand that your professional and legal problems weren't coincidental. What you don't understand is that your relationship was never as private as you believed. Chad, did you really think it was coincidence that Jessica became your client just as your sales numbers were declining? I recommended her to you through mutual business contacts, knowing your pattern of targeting vulnerable married women. Jessica, did you really believe Chad pursued you because of your beauty and charm? I provided him with detailed information about our marriage problems and our financial situation, knowing he would see you as an easy target. You didn't find each other. I brought you together, knowing that your mutual weaknesses would lead to the destruction of both your lives. Every hotel meeting, every stolen moment, every plan you made was part of a larger design that you never suspected. You wanted to destroy my family and steal my daughter. Instead, you destroyed yourselves. And Emma is safe from both of you forever. Welcome to the consequences of threatening my child. Timothy Rice." As Chad and Jessica read Timothy's final revelation, they realized with growing horror that their entire relationship had been a manipulation orchestrated by the man they'd tried to betray. They hadn't outsmarted Timothy Rice. They'd been his unwitting puppets, dancing to a tune he'd composed from the very beginning. The perfect storm had arrived, and they were drowning in the wreckage of their own ambitions. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The aftermath of Timothy's revelations rippled through the lives of everyone who had betrayed him with devastating efficiency. Chad and Jessica's discovery that their entire relationship had been orchestrated by Timothy sent both of them into emotional freefall, but their personal anguish was nothing compared to the legal and financial consequences that followed. Chad's arrest came first. Detective Hayes had built an airtight case with Timothy's evidence, and the grand jury returned indictments for theft by deception, conspiracy to commit fraud, and contributing to child endangerment. Chad's pattern of targeting married women, documented through his relationship with Jessica and testimony from his ex-wife Darla, painted a picture of a predator who systematically exploited vulnerable women for financial gain. Your client is looking at 5 to 7 years, the prosecutor told Chad's court-appointed attorney during plea negotiations. The evidence is overwhelming, and his pattern of behavior suggests this wasn't an isolated incident. Chad's lawyer reviewed the evidence, recorded conversations, financial documents, witness testimony, and delivered the harsh reality to his client. They have you dead to rights, Chad. Your best option is to plead guilty and hope for a lighter sentence. But Chad, broken by the revelation that Timothy had manipulated him from the beginning, was beyond rational decision-making. He played me, Chad muttered repeatedly during their meetings. Everything we did, everything we planned, he knew about it all along. He wanted us to do it. That doesn't change the fact that you committed the crimes, his lawyer replied. Your motivation doesn't matter, your actions do. Jessica's situation was equally dire. The theft charges alone carried serious penalties, but the child endangerment charge related to her threat to lock Emma in the refrigerator was what truly destroyed her case. The court-appointed child psychologist's report detailed the emotional trauma Emma had suffered from Jessica's threats and manipulation. Your daughter was terrified of her own mother, the prosecutor explained to Jessica's attorney. The threat to lock her in a refrigerator wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was part of a pattern of emotional abuse designed to control the child's behavior and silence her about the affair. Jessica's attorney tried to argue that the refrigerator threat was taken out of context, but the audio recordings of Jessica and Chad discussing how to manipulate Emma's emotions made that defense impossible. The evidence showed premeditation and a callous disregard for the child's well-being. Ms. Rice, you're facing serious jail time and permanent loss of custody rights, her attorney warned. The prosecutor is offering a plea deal that includes supervised visitation with your daughter, but only if you plead guilty to all charges and provide full cooperation in the case against Mr. Lester. Jessica stared at the plea documents, finally understanding the scope of Timothy's revenge. He hadn't just destroyed her relationship and her career, he'd systematically eliminated her ability to be a mother to Emma. Meanwhile, Timothy was dealing with the fallout from his parents' betrayal. Franklin and Wilma Powers had learned about Jessica's arrest through local news coverage, and they were struggling to understand how they'd been so completely deceived. We had no idea, Wilma said when she called Timothy, her voice thick with guilt and confusion. She seemed so genuine when she called us. We thought you were having some kind of breakdown. She was very convincing. Timothy agreed, his tone carefully neutral. She's had a lot of practice manipulating people. Timothy, we're so sorry. We should have believed you about Emma. We should have protected her instead of taking Jessica's word. Timothy was quiet for a long moment. His parents' apology was sincere, but the damage they'd done by siding with Jessica against their own granddaughter couldn't be easily forgiven. Mom, you chose to believe a woman who threatened to lock your granddaughter in a refrigerator over the granddaughter herself. You heard Emma tell you what happened, and you decided she was lying or mistaken. How do I explain that to an 8-year-old? We made a terrible mistake. Franklin's voice came through the speakerphone. We let Jessica convince us that you were being paranoid. We thought we were helping the family stay together. You were helping Jessica destroy the family, Timothy replied flatly. And you were teaching Emma that the adults in her life wouldn't protect her when she told the truth about being threatened. The conversation ended without resolution. Timothy wasn't ready to forgive his parents, and they were struggling to understand how their good intentions had made them complicit in Jessica's emotional abuse of Emma. But the most satisfying moment of Timothy's revenge came when he received word that Chad and Jessica had turned on each other. Facing serious jail time and desperate to minimize their sentences, both had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for plea deals. This cooperation included testifying against each other and providing details about their conspiracy that further solidified the case against both of them. Chad claimed that Jessica had initiated the affair and the theft scheme, painting himself as a victim of her manipulation. Jessica countered that Chad had pursued her aggressively and convinced her to steal the money for their planned new life together. Both versions contained enough truth to be believable and enough blame shifting to ensure that neither would receive the lighter sentences they hoped for. "They're destroying each other," Stephen Riggs reported to Timothy with professional satisfaction. "Each one is providing evidence that strengthens the case against the other. It's exactly what we hoped would happen." Timothy nodded, but his expression remained grim. "Good. I want them both to understand that loyalty works both ways. When you betray someone, you can't expect loyalty in return." The final chapter of Jessica and Chad's legal troubles came when they were sentenced. Chad received 6 years in prison, with the judge noting his pattern of predatory behavior toward married women and his complete lack of remorse for the emotional damage he'd caused to Emma. Jessica received 4 years, with the possibility of supervised visitation with Emma after she completed her sentence and underwent extensive counseling. The judge was particularly harsh about her threats against her own daughter. "Ms. Rice, you betrayed the most fundamental duty of parenthood, protecting your child from harm," the judge said during sentencing. "Your threat to lock an 8-year-old child in a refrigerator was not discipline, it was abuse. And your subsequent attempts to manipulate that child's emotions for your own benefit show a complete disregard for her well-being." As Timothy sat in the courtroom watching Jessica led away in handcuffs, he felt no triumph, only a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. Emma was safe, the threats to her well-being had been eliminated, and everyone who had betrayed them had faced consequences for their actions. But Timothy's revenge wasn't complete yet. There was still one final reckoning to come, one that would ensure that everyone understood the full cost of betraying Timothy Rice and threatening his daughter. The game was almost over, but Timothy had saved the most devastating move for last. Chapter 9, The Final Judgment. 6 months after Jessica and Chad's sentencing, Timothy sat in his home office reviewing the final reports from Mitchell Root. The private investigator had been thorough in documenting the complete destruction of Timothy's enemies, but the reports contained one last surprise that would serve as the perfect conclusion to Timothy's campaign of revenge. "Chad's been having problems in prison," Mitchell reported during their final meeting. "Turns out his cellmate is the ex-husband of one of the women Chad scammed before Jessica. Word gets around in prison about guys who prey on women and children." Timothy raised an eyebrow. "Poetic justice. Gets better. Jessica's been trying to get early release for good behavior, but someone's been providing the parole board with regular updates about her complete lack of remorse and her continued attempts to blame you for her situation." "Someone?" Mitchell smiled. "Anonymous concerned citizen. Very detailed letters about her ongoing mental state and fitness for early release." Timothy nodded approvingly. Even in prison, Jessica and Chad were facing the consequences of their actions. But the most important outcome of his campaign wasn't their suffering. It was Emma's recovery and protection. Emma had thrived in the months since Jessica's departure. With the threat of her mother's emotional manipulation removed, Timothy's daughter had blossomed into a confident, happy child. The court-appointed therapist reported that Emma showed no lasting trauma from Jessica's threats, largely because Timothy had acted quickly to remove her from the toxic environment. "She's remarkable resilient," Dr. Natasha Phelps told Timothy during one of their sessions. "Children who receive strong support from a protective parent often recover completely from emotional abuse. Emma knows you protected her, and that knowledge has given her tremendous security." Timothy's relationship with his parents remained strained, but was slowly improving. Franklin and Wilma had undergone their own therapy to understand how they'd been manipulated by Jessica, and they were working to rebuild trust with both Timothy and Emma. "We were wrong," Franklin admitted during one of their carefully supervised visits with Emma. "We let Jessica convince us that you were being paranoid, and we failed to protect Emma when she needed us most." "It's going to take time," Timothy replied. "Emma needs to see that the adults in her life will consistently choose her safety over social convenience." Wilma nodded, tears in her eyes. "We understand. We'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust and hers." The visits were limited and structured, but they were progress. Timothy was willing to give his parents a chance to rebuild their relationship with Emma, but it would be on his terms and at his pace. They'd lost the right to unlimited access to their granddaughter when they'd sided with her abuser. But the most satisfying element of Timothy's victory wasn't the destruction of his enemies or the protection of his daughter. It was the demonstration of what happened when someone threatened his family. Word had spread through their community about the systematic and complete way Timothy had dismantled Jessica and Chad's lives. "I heard what happened with your ex-wife," said Benjamin Campos, one of Timothy's business competitors, during a construction industry meeting. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Timothy smiled coldly. "I don't have a bad side, Benjamin. I have a protective side and a destructive side. Which one you see depends entirely on how you treat my family." The message was clear to everyone who knew the story. Timothy Rice was not a man to be crossed, and threatening his daughter was a mistake that carried permanent consequences. As Timothy reviewed the final documentation of his campaign, he reflected on the lessons learned. Jessica had gambled that she could manipulate him, steal from him, and threaten his daughter without consequences. Chad had believed he could seduce another man's wife and steal his money without retribution. Both had discovered that Timothy Rice was not the passive victim they'd assumed him to be. The refrigerator threat that had started everything seemed like a lifetime ago, but Timothy remembered every detail of that moment when he'd realized his wife was capable of endangering their daughter. That moment had transformed him from a trusting husband into a calculating strategist, and the transformation had been permanent. Timothy looked at a photo on his desk, Emma laughing as she played in their backyard, her face bright with the security that came from knowing her father would always protect her. This was what victory looked like, not the destruction of his enemies, but the safety and happiness of his child. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Stephen Riggs' number. "Timothy, I have some news about Jessica's latest appeal attempt." "Let me guess, denied." "Unanimously." The appeals court was particularly unimpressed with her claims that she was the victim of your manipulation. Apparently, they found her recorded conversations about framing you for mental instability to be rather compelling evidence of her true character. Timothy smiled. "Good. What about Chad?" His parole hearing was postponed indefinitely after the board received detailed information about his lack of rehabilitation and continued attempts to blame his victims for his crimes. "From an anonymous source, I assume?" "The most thorough anonymous source I've ever seen," Stephen replied with amusement. "This person seems to have detailed knowledge of both Chad and Jessica's prison behavior and mental states." Timothy closed the files on his desk and locked them in his safe. The documentation would remain there permanently, insurance against any future attempts by Jessica or Chad to rebuild their lives and threaten new victims. As he prepared dinner for Emma that evening, Timothy reflected on the completeness of his victory. Jessica and Chad had lost everything: their freedom, their careers, their relationship, and their reputations. His parents had learned that loyalty to family meant protecting the innocent, not enabling the guilty. And Emma was safe, happy, and secure in the knowledge that her father would always choose her well-being over social expectations or family pressure. The cost of threatening Timothy Rice's daughter had been total destruction. The message was clear, permanent, and absolute. Some lines should never be crossed, and some men never forget or forgive those who cross them. Timothy Rice was such a man, and his enemies had learned that lesson too late to save themselves. As Emma helped him set the table, chattering about her day at school and her plans for the weekend, Timothy smiled. This was what mattered, not the destruction of his enemies, but the protection and happiness of his child. Justice had been served, completely and without mercy. And in the Rice household, safety and loyalty reigned supreme, as they always would. The war was over. Timothy had won, and his victory was absolute and eternal.